Hey everybody, welcome back to the Miser's Guide to Evony. In video number 3 of The Art of War, I am going to be talking about designing a PvP archer preset. Before I get started, I want to just go through my disclaimer real quick to remind you that the knowledge and stuff in here is simplified so that it's a little more understandable. It's also speculative knowledge, meaning that it's based off of things that I've experienced and other people have experienced and we've discussed. So it's speculative. None of it's fact. None of it is given to us by Evony. Nobody in the entire game really has concrete understanding of the battle mechanics because nothing has really been released by Evony to really inform us as players. So it's all speculative knowledge. It's also knowledge that can become obsolete if the game changes in any way that impacts the things that I'm saying here. So if you're watching this video in the distant future, then please keep that in mind and check to see if there have been any updates that will impact what is going on here in this video. There are many different interpretations to this topic and any PvP related topic. So some players will not feel that what I'm saying is the most effective, and some people will, or some people will with different variations, and all of that is fine. I will discuss that a little bit later. Just take it as a starting place and grow from there is what I suggest. Okay, so the PvP Archer March. I'm going to give you a glance at what's going on in the battle. We're going to look at the troop type. We're going to talk about what this kind of a PvP march is good at. What is it really bad at? Where should you use it? Where should you not use it? That sort of thing. And then I'm going to give you a demonstration on setting up the actual PvP march so that you can use it. I'll also talk about some variations as well. So I'm going to reset the battlefield here and give you a kind of an idea of where we are in the battle, what's going on, and where the archers start attacking. So this is your field of battle. Let's say that it happens that round 1 starts and the siege start attacking each other, and the cavalry have moved up, the archers have moved up slightly, and the ground have moved up. We'll move on to round 2. The siege have moved up a little more and they're still attacking each other. The cavalry now come into contact with each other. The archers move up and they're probably in range of attacking the other siege, or they're getting, or sorry, the other cavalry, or else they're getting very close to being able to. The ground have moved up as well, but they're not quite in combat yet. And then another round, let's say that the cavalry are still attacking each other, getting close to wiping each other out, and the ground are now coming within range of the other cavalry, so they're kind of engaging that combat. The archers have begun attacking the, or maybe they've already started attacking the cavalry. So this is kind of where we're at. The archers are not being really attacked by anyone unless the siege have managed to wipe out the other siege and have begun attacking the archers. So really they're at a place where they are dealing damage to other units, specifically the cavalry, and they're not taking a whole lot of damage yet. Now, if the cavalry, the ground, or whatever are wiped out, then these melee units are going to run and they're going to attack the archers and wipe them out really quickly. Even if the cavalry gone, if the ground make it over to the archers, they're going to wipe them out pretty hard. So that is really how the field of battle works in terms of the archers. Okay, the archer unit itself. I'm going to go over here in my screen over to archers so we can take a quick look at my current stats for the tier 14. So in comparison to other units, I have it color coded. Yellow means they're pretty good at something, but they're not the best. Orange means they're okay at something, and red, which there are none of, means that they're terrible at, or they're the worst at. So they're not the worst at anything, they're not the best at anything. They have pretty good attack, they have okay defense and HP in comparison to other units, and their range is okay as well. So they're, at first glance, a mediocre unit. But in reality, simply because they are ranged and they have a pretty good level of attack, it actually makes them a very strong unit and something that you're going to want to have quite a surplus of. Archers are fantastic units, even though they don't shine in any particular area. Archers tend to attack the first unit that comes into their range, and that's largely on the field of battle going to be that cavalry. So when the cavalry first gets into range, the archers have already started to attack them, even though they're fighting other cavalry. So they basically, archers are getting free shots on cavalry, and that's why archers are particularly effective against cavalry. And they can, even though you might lose the battle, you'll still deal a lot of damage against cavalry. And that's why their PvP archer marches are just so crucial to anyone's setup. All right. Strengths. So the strength of an archer attack, is, whether solo or rally, is they can wipe out the enemy's cavalry. And once you've wiped out the enemy's cavalry, that opens the enemy up to getting attacked by other units such as ground that will go and decimate their archers. So they're really good at softening up the enemy by taking out those cavalry layers. And once the cavalry is gone, there's all kinds of vulnerabilities. They're also used often as just a unit that is not a master of anything, but they're not bad at anything either. So if I send an archer march, for example, I can deal a lot of damage knowing that I'm going to lose. That kind of an attack. So kind of like a safe, cover all your bases kind of attack that can deal a lot of damage under most in most scenarios. Their weakness is they're very weak against ground. Ground have a lot of HP and a lot of defense, so those archer attacks are not going to be particularly effective against ground units. And also, one of the strategies I'm going to talk about later for PvP is to ghost units, and that essentially hides the units. So if they are hiding their cavalry from PvP combat, then your archers are not going to be able to deal a lot of damage to the cavalry that is hidden, because they're hidden. So they're going to have to deal instead with ground troops, which they're weak against, and other archers, which they're equivalent to. So it's putting them at a disadvantage. So you should probably avoid those kind of scenarios where you're put at a disadvantage because you have to attack ground setup. Okay, we're at the point now where I'm going to talk about the preset and setting up the preset. First part is I want to tell you that there is no absolute preset. There's no, this is the way to go, this is the absolute, and you have to do it this way. There's no such thing, and any player that tells you that there is wrong. What I will tell you instead is there are many variations, and all these variations are useful in different kinds of situations. The only true fact is your layers have to exist. Whether it's one unit or several thousand units, every single tier and every single unit should exist in any preset. It has to exist. We'll talk about some of the variations and how many to put in later, but keep in mind that there is no absolute, and that's a really important thing to understand. So in setting up the preset, there's a couple things I want to consider. I know that they're not particularly effective against cavalry that are hidden, and it's not very effective against ground. So do not use this kind of a march if you notice those things in your scout report. Okay, the first thing I want to do before I set up my preset is I want to figure out my march size. I can very easily do this by selecting my general, whichever general I'm using. And in this case, for my PvP archer, I'm going to be using Minamoto. So my Minamoto's march size with his current gear is 1.527. So I want to keep that in mind. And the reason that I'm checking my march size for this general is because I don't know this for certain, but I think in a recent patch they adjusted the way that march presets worked, because I've never encountered this problem before, where when I go to my march preset, it's telling me I have a march size of 2.1 million, and that's what it would be with a senior buff. I don't want to set my preset to be 2.127, because if I do that, then when I do a PvP march against somebody and I haven't put on a senior march, which is like 90% or 95% of the time, then I'm going to lose all my layers. So I want to set my march preset to be just the normal march that I would have under every scenario. And if I do happen to use a senior march, I will just temporarily increase the units and then scale it back later. So I'm going to go with 1.527 is my march size. Okay. I've already got my march preset set up here, and whether you have your subordinate cities attached or not is really, it's your own flavor. I will turn them on if I'm going to be doing like world combat and so on. You remember that your subcities are not going to be included in your PvP rallies. So I mean, you can turn it on and it'll be pretty safe, or not. Like it's your choice. But if you're doing solo attacks, definitely make sure that that is included. Okay, so I'm going to start actually at the bottom. I'm going to go all the way down to my tier 1. And what you'll see for the first many tiers is I have 1,000 troops of every type of unit all the way up. The reason I have that is because the layers have to exist. Some players will tell you to put 2,000 there. Some players will tell you to put 5,000, 10,000. I've heard all kinds of different things. The reality is the layers just have to exist. And there are cases where a march size with layers of 5,000 will be more effective than my 1,000. That's absolutely true. And that's more in the case where the layers of your enemy are very small. Now, the reality, though, is that I attack players that are very big and they have layers in the size of millions. So whether I have 1,000 tier 1 catapults or 1 tier 1 catapult is not going to make any difference whatsoever. All of my catapults, all of my tier 1 troops are going to be killed by their tier 1 troops in the first round. So really, all of these could be just 1. It's entirely fine for it to be just 1. The only reason I leave it at 1,000 is because if my enemy is very weakened and they've lost a lot of their layers because of rallies or so on, then it's possible that they just have some revived troops or so on that might be less than my 1,000. It's not super likely, but 1,000 units isn't, I don't know, like 1,000 times 10 is just 10,000. So I'm losing 10,000 of my useful troops, which is a sacrifice I'm willing to take. I might change it in the future and drop it down to 500 or something like that. But for now, 1,000 is good for me here. So I just go 1,000 of each unit all the way up until I get to about tier 10. Tier 10 is kind of where I stop this. And I stop it here because after tier 10, the units start to get decent. They're not terrible anymore. Tier 11 archers are okay. They're not great, but I do increase it to 15,000 just so that if they do have weaker layers of tier 11 there, mine can wipe them out and then start attacking the tier 12. It doesn't happen very often, but it's there in case I want to, and still they can do quite a bit of damage, but I don't want to be too excessive in that number. My tier 12, however, they pack a lot of punch. They do a lot of damage considering their power and their resource cost, so I do want to make them the bulk of my units. So I have about 650,000. I just used my slider to choose a random kind of number there. But around 650,000 is what I have. Then my tier 13, I have a bit less. They're still great units, but I have less than my tier 12. And like I said, the adjustment here depends on your own preference. So play around with what you have depending on the amount of units you have and so on. It's really up to you. So play around with things, but I would say that generally you want your tier 12 to be the bulk of your troops. Tier 13, slightly less, but still quite a bit. And lastly, you want your tier 14 to be significant, but still less than your tier 13. And that's really not because the tier 13 and tier 14 are not valuable. They're great units. But in terms of power loss and the resource cost of creating them, they're not as effective economically as a tier 12 unit. So that's why a lot of players go with tier 12 units. I've heard a lot of other theories about the battle mechanics, which I just don't think are true. I think it really just has to do with the economy of the troop itself. You'll also notice that I have some tier 14 cavalry. I have some tier 13 cavalry, and could also put some tier 12 cavalry. I have increased the layers a bit, not significantly, but a bit. My goal in doing so is, here's the consideration. So archers are not great against ground. If there's any way possible that I could slow down my enemy's ground units from reaching my units, it would be with my cavalry. If my cavalry can wipe out their cavalry and then stall the ground units for a round or two, that gives my archers more time to deal damage to the ground units before they get attacked by the ground units. I don't want to make those layers so big that it negatively impacts the performance of my archers, because they're going to be buffed by my monarch gear and so on. But I do want to slow down that ground if I can. Now, a lot of the time, these 15,000 or 20,000 or 30,000 counter units have absolutely no effect. But there are times that they make all the difference in the world. So to sacrifice 20, 30, 40,000 units to put for my counter units will very often be a positive gain for me. So I want to make sure that I have those counters in. Worst case, then they just die and they deal a little bit of damage and they're not significantly important. But best case, they can change everything. So I would highly suggest you include that. I think I mentioned this before. Just be very careful with the way that this the March preset thing works now, because if I go and I look, I have the 1.527 my normal March here out of the 2.127. If I went and did this and I'm like, oh look, I actually have all that extra space, let me just max it out, let me just use all of this and make these bigger. Well, here's what's going to happen, or here's what I think is what will happen. When you go to actually do PvP, whether it's server versus server or it's in Battlefield, and you choose to do a preset attack with your Minamoto, and it goes to 2.127, if you don't have your senior march on, then it's just going to take the units from tier 14 down until it reaches the cap, which means that you'll get to about right here, and then none of the layers below will actually apply. And you'll basically be sending all of these troops without layers to die, because they'll be taking extra damage. So I would be very cautious of this new system. I hope they actually change it back to what it was, or they allow you to choose the march size that you're making a preset for. In fact, I wish they tripled the amount of presets that were possible, but it's all VIP locked, and you know, I could complain about a million things, but I'll try not to. So I would suggest that you create your preset not to what it allows you to, but to your actual march size. Okay, and that concludes this video. Hopefully it has been helpful to you in designing your setup. And remember, there are a lot of variations. Go with what you feel is best and experiment based on your own knowledge and research and so on. This is just a starting place. I do want to thank all the people that are channel members and supporting the Miser's Guide to Evony. If you are interested in doing that, there's a join button and you can join as a member, just as a way to support the channel and continue it growing. Another thing that you can consider doing is joining the Discord channel if you've not already done so. There's a great community of people there that share ideas and communicate and help each other. So it is a great way to get and also give help within the game, and also just chat with people. Thank you again for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you for the next video.